Okay, I want to welcome our students to our discussion on preaching through Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 to 23. And as Tim and I both approached this in the series that we preached, we each had one sermon on this passage. So we'll walk through a little bit of that, and then maybe after that, walk through some other options that you have as you come to this passage. But let me first ask Tim to walk us through what he preached through on Colossians 2, 16 to 23.
I will do that. Let me see. Which one am I sharing? Okay. How's that for being class? All right. Just kind of remind the students where we've been, where I've been in my series, and partially to help remind me, so here's how I've had fleshed out the series. We're complete because we've received the good news. We've been rescued. Christ is supreme. I think I had this fourth one wrong on the very first session. I did go back to verse 21, because Christ changes us. So I had 4 sermons on the first chapter. And then because Christ knits us together, because Christ wins the victory, and now we're to because Christ is the reality. And kind of my theme for this was this question, which is, how often do we make our rules the virtual reality? And virtual reality, is kind of an in thing with tech people. I guess it's
Sure.
15 years, 20 years old. But instead of keeping Christ as the actual reality. And so first point, what happens when we make rules the reality rather than keeping Christ as the reality? That was kind of my theme. Making rules the reality inflates our pride. And we come down here primarily to verse 18. I'm picking up verse 16, 17. I kind of introduced that in the opening of the message. I also comment on the fact that in this section, and I'm sure you deal with this in the lectures, we're really getting into the nuts and bolts of what's sometimes called the Colossian heresy.
Right.
What is the issue? What is the false teaching in Colossae? Almost impossible to come up with a specific answer. Every commentary, that's why they get paid to write commentaries, right? Come up with a new idea. But there seems to be some kind of combining of Greek mysticism with Judaism or Judaistic mysticism, not the Judaizers, as you point out in Galatians, as you pointed out in the comment on WhatsApp, which was very well said, but something, combining. N.T. Wright just thinks it's Jews in general, that there's a conflict with Jews pressing in on the church.
Right.
All right. But anyhow, so we're really into trying to describe what's going on without getting stuck on it like I am right now. And so we get to verse 18. So making rules. So I focus on this idea of making rules. And verse 18, such a person goes into great detail about what he has seen, and his unspiritual mind puffs him up with idle notions. So making rules the reality inflates our pride. The second point is pride leads us to judge others. You notice Paul writes in verse 16, therefore do not let anyone judge you by what you drink. This is an issue, one of the primary issues in dealing with whatever this heresy or conflict is at the church in Colossae. And we come down, do not let anyone who delights in false humility in the worship of angels disqualify you for the prize. Scott McKnight says this word disqualify you jumps the word judge up by a notch. N.T. Wright refers to a judge and an umpire, right? As if an umpire ruling a person out of a game, or I use the imagery of a game host disqualifying you for adding an S to an answer. Okay. That's a very Western illustration. right? And so this pride is rules not only inflates our pride, it leads us to judge others. Third, pride disconnects us from Christ and the church, or from the body and others, is what I say here. Notice he has lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows as God causes it to grow. So we're disconnected from Christ. Perhaps these people weren't even believers to begin with. Perhaps this, depending on what your own theology on this is, perhaps this is disqualifying them as a believer, or at the very least, when we're not connected to Christ, we're not growing in Christ.
Right.
Right. So these are all possibilities, and I talk about all three. I'm sure you pick up on that, but this whole idea, this word translated shadow, these are a shadow of the things that were to come. That word is actually the word soma, right? Body. So there may be a play on word here by Paul, or it may even be this contrast here in verse 19 about not only, I'm sorry, the word shadow is not there. It's the word translated reality. I'm sorry. These are a shadow of things that become the reality. That's what I meant to say. That's the word soma, the word body, right? So there may be, and then Paul goes on this idea of being disconnected. Well, this person has lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, supported together by its ligaments and sinews, causes it to grow. So that's a possible link there. And then finally, making rules the reality gives us no power to change. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom, picking down in verse 23, with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body. But they lack, seems like wherever my screen is, it's the wrong place.
Yeah.
But they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. And then I mentioned to you before we started recording, I quote Philip K. Dick, who's a science fiction writer, been dead many, many years. I don't know much about him. I'm not trying to suggest you should be reading all of his stuff, but I ran across this quote from him: reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And so this idea of Christ as being the reality.
Well, and I came at it from a different direction, but then I think we end up in sort of a similar place, in that I started by talking about how some of us don't feel like we're doing a very good job at living the Christian life, right? I mean, I think many of us, we look at our lives, or even look at people that we go to church with, or students might look to professors, whatever it is, and we go, they're doing that better than me. They've got that figured out in a way that I haven't. And maybe I don't feel like I'm doing enough. Maybe I don't think I'm a very good person. But then we get to that point and we think, okay, surely there's something out there to do that's going to give me a connection with God that I don't have right now. And I think that's where we can come into the place of creating these rules and regulations and bringing things over from the culture, or bringing things over from other religion, or wherever it may be, that we think is going to make us better or bring us closer to God. And in this passage, Paul keeps bringing us back. I put it this way, just after I read through verse 19: if we're depending on anything but Jesus to develop our relationship with God, we're cut off from what keeps us connected to God, which is ultimately Jesus. And I mean, I think that's Paul's point, that we can come up with lots of stuff that feels like it's more constructive, feels like it's more active than just putting our faith in Jesus. And ultimately, that's a bad path to go on. And my ultimate point was this: extra rules don't make us extra spiritual. And, I think this can take so many forms, right? I mean, I grew up in a pretty legalistic Christian tradition, part of the Restoration movement, but ultimately very legalistic, and lots of rules and regulations of when you need to be at church and what you need to do and what you can do, what you can't do outside of church. And some of those things were scriptural, and some of those things I think were what I might say extra biblical. In other words, they were add-ons that seem like they're to keep us holy, to keep us righteous, but really they take it a lot further. And then when you start enforcing that on everyone, then they become much like these rules that Paul's talking about. So in my sort of application section, I talked about, first of all, focusing on Jesus, because that's where Paul, first two chapters, it keeps bringing us back to that over and over. We've got to focus on Jesus and all this stuff. Second, look to the Bible, because how are we going to know about Jesus if we don't study what we have there about Jesus? And then don't create new rules. And I think that there's a tendency for Christians throughout history to come up with rules and regulations that seem logical, that seem at their outset like they make sense and would keep people in the right path and would guide them to God. And they may do that, but when they start being enforced as mandatory, then we have a problem. Now, sometimes those rules and regulations just come from nowhere and really aren't of much value at all. So it's a matter of trying to figure that out.
I would say,
go ahead.
To that end, and then maybe I'll remember the next thing, but I want to see what direction you want to go on it. I have this little pun that I've used for years, this little ditty. It probably won't make sense to our African brothers and sisters, but it's, that we make Christianity all about, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't chew, and I don't go with girls that do.
Right.
And that I think that's very applicable in the southeastern part of the United States, and it usually gets a laugh, even though most of my people have heard it 300 times. Maybe they're laughing, hoping that one day I'll stop using it. But we just resort and reduce Christianity to rules. The flip side of that is we live in a culture where it's almost anathema to put rules on people.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with a sense of obligation. There's nothing, going to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday may not make you a better person, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with it either.
Right.
I heard a sports announcer when the ball barely dribbled into the goal. It was basketball, but our brothers in Africa and sisters may think of football. The ball just barely getting into the goal, and he said that's clean living and church on Wednesday night. Right. And there's nothing wrong with clean living and church on Wednesday night.
Those are good things.
It won't get you into heaven.
Right.
On the other hand, it could be a response to how we live.
Right.
That's what Paul begins doing in chapter 3.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Tim and I had a brief discussion before we started on how we think about this, verse 16, where Paul says, therefore, do not let anybody judge you about what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. And I think they were, again, as Tim said, it's notoriously difficult to determine exactly what the Colossian heresy is, exactly what false teaching Paul's battling, because we're only hearing what Paul has to say about it. But if he's talking to some kind of, speaking to some kind of false teaching that involves adoption of Jewish holidays, Jewish practice, or maybe some pagan practice that's mixed in a little bit together, they're celebrating some holidays and, thinking that's creating a sense of holiness that they wouldn't have otherwise, and maybe enforcing that on others. How do we translate that over into our cultures where we may have holidays that are religious holidays? I mean, most of us have some form of celebration in our churches of Christmas and Easter, and that becomes a pretty important part of our religious year, our church year. So can we reconcile that with what Paul has to say here? Is it okay, or should we maybe rethink that? To be honest, I grew up in a tradition for which Christmas was not a religious holiday, because they looked at passages like this and said, you know what? First of all, we don't know for sure Jesus was born on December 25th. So why do
Fair
we need to
point.
celebrate it then? And maybe we'd be better off not making religious festivals because we could fall into the same kind of false teaching. Now, I think that's probably taking it too far, but how can we think about the church calendar, which different churches use in a host of ways, right? In a healthy way and still obey exactly, what Paul's getting at here. So I don't know that we have a perfect answer, but I think it's worth at least talking through. So what's your thoughts on that, Tim?
Well,
I've asked about 5 questions there, I know. So you can answer any of them you want to.
all right, friends, we'll see you next week. Well, the way you phrased it this time, slightly different than the way you phrased it in our discussion. So let me pick up this whole idea of the church calendar. Because as you know, this beginning in last December, it was probably the last Sunday in November, I preached from what's the church universal knows as Advent, preparation for Christmas. From Advent through Pentecost, which was in June, maybe the last Sunday in May. Again, I'm drawing a blank on when things were last year, and it varies according to whoever makes up these rules. I'm not sure. It probably all varies because of Easter.
Right.
Christmas is always December 25th. Easter,
Easter
in the West is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring or vernal equinox, right? If memory serves me right.
No, that's right.
So for the first time really ever, I followed what's called the church calendar, and involved in the church calendar is the lectionary. In the lectionary, you're giving, and I followed, there's different lectionaries. I followed what's called the Revised Common Lectionary, and it gives you 4 texts for every Sunday. So we have reading 1, which is an Old Testament reading as part of the lectionary. We have the Psalm, which is most often an Old Testament Psalm, but sometimes another Psalm. It can be a poem from the New Testament. Mary's Magnificat in Luke chapter 1 is an example. Several passages in Luke chapter 1, Elizabeth's song, and then Zechariah's song, right, can all serve as the psalmic passage, a hymnic passage for the day. Then you have your gospel passage, and the lectionary rotates. Year A, B, and C. Year A is Matthew. Year B is primarily Luke. There are Sundays that are different. For instance, John shows up every Easter, I believe. And then year C would be Luke. This past year that I was in, we were in Luke. And then the 4th passage is called Reading 2. The second reading, normally an epistle, not always. It can be Revelation, it can be Acts during, I believe, the season of Easter. It's usually Acts, if memory serves me right. All of that to say is this, for the first time ever, I've followed the lectionary this year. But I've had it. Our tradition's not far from the tradition that you grew up in that we talk about Bible things by Bible names, right? No creed but Christ. So occasionally I found myself saying, we're connecting with the church at large, with brothers and sisters that aren't part of our unique fellowship. And it's a tool, if I can use that word. It's just a way to look at the church calendar and the church year. And then the way I handled that was to preach series in those individual seasons. My daughter goes to a church, one of our churches, but they just get up and they preach one of the 4 lectionary passages. They don't ever try to, I won't say ever, but they don't think of it in terms of a series. They're just preaching the lectionary. But I have been preaching series for almost 30 years now, and it was hard for me to get away from that.
Right. So, and I want us to talk more about that when we come to series, but it does play into this because it brings up all the holidays, right? I mean, it's centered around Easter, and the whole calendar structures around Easter, as you said, because it moves all these holidays around, and then Advent and Christmas. So it's a celebration of those, but I think maybe the difference here is you're not making it, mandatory or a test of some kind.
Right.
But it does, I think one of the advantages is, or a couple of advantages, it keeps us on a rhythm of seasons that takes the people in the church through sort of the history of God's work. And some people said, well, it doesn't cover some parts of scripture. That's true. On the other hand, when I have preached from the lectionary over the years, and it's been occasional, not often, but occasional, it sometimes can take us to passages that we wouldn't get to on our own.
Yeah.
So in that way, it can be even more biblical than an approach where we're choosing what to preach on. So
to that end, and I guess this is all a later discussion, or we may end up skipping that discussion. To that end, I can remember you and I, we were going to preach lectionary together. We were in year C, cycle C with Gospel of Luke, and about looking at it, and 2 weeks in, we were skipping so many passages in Luke that I couldn't do it anymore.
yeah, right.
You ended up preaching lectionary. I just preach straight through Luke,
because it does skip big chunks, right?
Yeah.
Or it may put them elsewhere, so they're not in that order because of trying to follow the holidays and passages that relate to holidays. Anyway,
but what I tended to do during Advent, I focused on the prophetic passages.
Yeah.
During Epiphany, I think I focused on Luke. I think during not 100% sure about that. During Lent, I went with the Psalms and talked about preparing for Easter,
right,
by looking at the Psalms. So I moved it around. I didn't just follow Luke, or didn't.
Yeah, right.
But that was part of the series.
Yeah.
The second part of your earlier question about holidays, personally, well, I think I would be hung at my house if we said we weren't going to do Christmas.
Right.
So, and
we did Christmas. It just wasn't anything about Jesus when I was a kid. See, so it was, Santa Claus
we didn't
was
do
fine.
It in church, right?
No, right. Yeah. No Jesus, no baby Jesus at church, but Santa Claus was fine at home. So.
Right. But Dr. Webb, who was professor at Milligan, when I was a student there, now 40 years ago, and Dr. Webb went to be with the Lord several years ago. But I can remember him talking about people in church, they wouldn't have a Christmas tree in the church. They wouldn't do anything Christmas, but if you went to their house,
right,
it was decked out with wreaths and everything. And, my take, we have a Christmas tree here at the church. We decorate for Christmas here at the church. I think as long as you're not making Christmas more important than Christ, and you're recognizing this is a human holiday, this is a Western holiday in our case. I guess it's throughout the world, but some people don't want to use the word Easter, right? And there are you can find people online who attribute Easter to a Persian holiday, and it's hogwash, right? But in every other country but English and a second language, most of them are Pascha or something like that. So they're related to Passover. They're not related to Easter, to Ostra, the Persian holiday. But my point in saying that is, as long as you're kind of recognizing what you're doing with those holidays, I think it's fine.
Well, and I think Paul's point here is that Jesus is sufficient, right? And if we're using the holiday to point people to Jesus and some aspect of Jesus' life, ministry, salvific role in the universe, I mean, if that's what we're using these holidays to do, then I think it makes sense, right? If we're using it for some other purpose, there's probably a problem there. And then we need to rethink what we're doing. And
we have evidence that the early church took these Roman secular holidays and
Right.
adapted them.
Right.
That doesn't mean Christmas, right? Why is
Right.
Christmas December 25th in the West? Eastern Orthodox is different. Eastern Church is different, but in the West, it's December 25th. It's probably partially related to the Sol Invictus, the Victory of the Sun
Right.
festival that was a Roman pagan. Doesn't mean that Christmas is pagan,
Right.
right? Christmas celebrates the birth of Christ. But what better image than to think of the sun defeating darkness,
Right.
right? And probably the Gospels indicate that the actual birth of Christ was in the spring, right? When you
Right.
look at shepherds in their fields and
Sure.
that kind of information.
I think to go back to Paul, it's a matter of, are we enforcing this? Are we saying this is the path to spirituality? And I think we would all say, you can be a very strong Christian and never celebrate Christmas the rest of your life, right? I mean, we're not
Sure.
saying that that is inherent in being a strong Christian or knowing God. There are multiple paths. This is certainly one of them, but they all have to go through the person of Jesus if we're going to get there. And if something guides us to Jesus, then it's appropriate. If it doesn't, then we need to think through it.
Yeah, now this discussion has been very Western centric.
Indeed. Yeah.
It would be interesting to hear from our African brothers and sisters.
Right. And I would
this.
encourage them to tell us on WhatsApp when they watch this, maybe what we've got wrong or what they would add or what the customs are where they are that could tell us more about their context. Because yeah, we've been thinking about what does this look like, Western culture in general and in the United States specifically.
You know, if there's such a close connection to some pagan evidence, pagan ritual or pagan background, there are times for the church to disassociate from it. So in our culture, those connections with pagan holidays are well lost.
Yeah.
I mean,
for hundreds of years, basically.
For hundreds of years. And so we're not dealing with that. Might be different for a different culture.
Right. I think not to delve into something that's too complicated or even controversial for some American churches, but we have a tendency more to involve holidays that are not based on Jesus and then get celebrated in church than things like Christmas and Easter, whether they're national holidays or related to something else. But we have to guard against where we end up. We don't want to be people who just worship our nationality. We want to worship Jesus. So, and again, that is a piece that's controversial in our churches. So
I've gotten increasingly queasy about
same here.
Celebrating national holidays. I don't think I thought about it all that much 25 or 30 years ago. I just kind of ran with it, and that can cause tension. I think of one particular person in our church that probably wouldn't be happy if I was really straightforward about why we don't acknowledge certain holidays, or if we acknowledge it, it's as a side.
Right.
It's a segue. I may preach a sermon on a national holiday that really has next to nothing to do with the national holiday, but the national holiday gives me a link.
Right.
It's on people's minds. You can't get away from that.
And again, I would love to hear what our students in Zimbabwe or other countries of Southern Africa, how that plays into your preaching. How do you talk about national holidays and those kinds of things? Because I honestly don't know, and it'd be good for us to have some discussion on how that works. Let's think a little bit about, we walked through our two basic approaches to this passage, but there's other ways that you could look at Colossians 2:16-23. Did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share on how this could be preached, Tim?
Probably about any way would be better than the way I preached it. I will comment on my sermon first, and then I'll make a couple other observations. One is, once again, I read through the sermon today. I'm not sure there's much you can do about it. Just because of the nature of the passage it was, and my style of preaching, but it was very exegetical, but not a lot of application.
This
I mean,
is not an easy passage in my mind.
no,
As
I mean, it was
for
one of those
preaching
things.
goes.
You're hoping that people will take something from their lives and make the application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just think on this one, you have to spend so much time explaining what Paul is talking about that it's easy to use whatever your allotted time is. I mean, whatever people's attention span is more important. But
Well,
getting through
my
all
allotted
that,
time and their attention
it's not always
span,
the same. I understand
it's
that.
not the same.
But getting through all that and having them hang with you through that to get to the application, there's just a lot to take apart in this passage. Because if you just read through it, I think there are a lot of things that people just really are not going to fully get on just a cursory first glance kind of reading. You have to walk through all that and then get to the application. And I think it's pretty challenging. So I'm with you on that.
I like my outline. I mean,
Yeah.
I pat myself on the back, and I like the progression of the outline.
I think it has good progression. That's what I noticed. Yeah, I agree.
But it was, if I go and try to do too much of both, then it becomes long for my context.
Yeah.
So, and I'm actually preaching shorter messages than I was pre-COVID. And I think that's good, but I am trying to be very specific about how many pages I write and how long I write.
Right.
Two things. One, as I was thinking about this and going through the passage today, if you were going to develop a couple themes, I think there's a couple other themes one could develop. One would be, you could go the stretch about being connected to the body and being disconnected to the body, and talk about not only connection to Christ, but connection to the church. I did that more in verses 1-7 about being knit together, but you could do that in this passage.
Right.
I think a second option would be to hang the idea of hanging on to true doctrine. The only danger in that is sometimes true doctrine is what the preacher wants to make it, and
right,
not what the Bible wants to make it. So, but you could easily, this whole idea about being disconnected to Christ, I used to have a saying, not making minors into majors,
right,
and sticking to what's really important and to true doctrine, I think could easily be brought about. There's some baptismal language in the passage.
That's right.
You know, so you could talk about, you know, kind of take that whole idea of baptismal language and run with it. Those are three thoughts that I would have in terms of approaching it in a different way than the way I approached it.
Yeah, and mine are somewhat similar, at least. I mean, one I thought about was how you could talk about the relationship of Christ and the church, right? I mean, as you said, the disconnection, if you will, in verse 19, their lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, so is supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows as God causes it to grow. So, what is the relationship between Christ and the body? I mean, certainly without Christ, the body loses all animation. It's not alive. It's not functioning. So what does that mean? I think there's something to do there.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you could talk a little bit about Christian practices, right? In terms of what we might call the disciplines. How do we balance that? You know, we have certain disciplines that we could say reading scripture or prayer or fasting or observing the Christian calendar. There's things that we do to grow closer to Christ. Paul warns us here not to be too legalistic about that, right? Or enforce it on other people. So there's a balance to be found there of pursuing Christ, but making sure, first of all, it's Christ that we're pursuing, not something else. And then not becoming too legalistic about what we do that's helped us. And then ultimately, and this is the theme that just goes all the way through Colossians that I think we've probably talked about every time, but the sufficiency of Christ, right? Everything for Paul prepares the way for Christ. And then ultimately, if it doesn't support our understanding of who Jesus is, then it's not needed because Jesus is sufficient to lead us to God. I think there's pieces of all that run through this passage and run through the rest of the book that you could connect in a series. So those are places to go. Any other thoughts on this one, Tim?
Well, yeah, I actually twofold. One is
Yeah.
I think this is passage you need to try to get into a commentary.
If there's one
And-
available, even online or whatever.
Yeah, probably two, if possible.
Agreed.
It's well, depending on who you're reading, right? I only say two in case you come up with some aberrant thinking about it, but it's hard to take this passage face value and know what it's talking about.
Right.
You ought to at least have some idea of what the options are. If you read two English translations, some of these key words get translated very different ways.
Yeah, right.
And I said, I also want to be clear. This was the last part of my introduction. Before I get multiple emails, in using the word rules, I'm not saying that there are no moral absolutes,
Right.
or that behavior doesn't matter. I'm not saying, as Paul was accused of saying in Romans, that we should sin so that grace abounds. My answer to that is Paul's answer, me genita,
Right.
or me genoito. I've heard it pronounced. May it never be. I am saying that we are often tempted to make our rules the reality rather than Christ. And that's an example of having in your head that interlocutor, that person. And I've had enough of this over the years that sometimes I do maybe too much of it, but sometimes there's a time to say, before we move on, let me clarify the way I'm using this word.
Important, right? Because, and anybody who's been preaching for a while has that person who seems to wait to catch us on something. But if they're thinking it, then if they're saying it, then there may be more people thinking it and at least wondering, is that what Tim is trying to say? And sometimes we need to say from the outset, listen, this is not what I'm saying. So listen up for what I am actually saying, because I think most of us who have been preaching a while have also had people come out and say, remember when you said this, that, and the other, and you're thinking,
no.
I would never say that, and I have never said that. So there are some things that it bears being careful about. Yeah, I agree.
My rules are equivalent to traditions, regulations, imposed human rules is the way I'm using it. And that brings to mind, I almost said this earlier, the great quote, if I don't mess it up, by Yaroslav Pelikan, the Yale scholar, who made the distinction between tradition and traditionalism. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. Tradition is the living faith of the dead.
Right. And I like that. And I think I'm using, because as I said, my main point is extra rules don't make us extra spiritual. And I think I'm using rules in the same way you are. And we have to clarify that, because we don't want to say that rules don't matter. We can just do whatever we want to do. There's nothing in scripture that tells us that there are moral right and wrong things. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about where we add rules that are not there in scripture.
In chapter 3, verse 1, the next verse we'll look at, Paul begins talking about behavior.
Exactly. Right? And then that continues. Right. Okay, we'll pick that up next time and hope this has been helpful to you.